So, ladies and gentlemen, today on Sports File, we're taking an interesting look at what's considered the only season of the 1970s where the Montreal Canadiens should have won the Stanley Cup, but didn't. The 1974-75 campaign. Now, that year was notable for many things for Montreal. It was a return of Ken Dryden after a one-year break for his legal career. It was the last season for longtime captain Henri Richard. It was a breakout year for superstar Guy Lafleur, who scored 53 goals that year. It was probably a record for a defenseman ever, where Serge Savard had a plus-minus of 71. And overall, the season had a lot of great success. They won the North Division that year. In their 80-game season, they only lost 14 goals while scoring 374. 47 wins, 19 ties. Now, this was, again, a transition season because Henri Richard entered his 20th season with Habs, but his health was failing. He suffered a massive left ankle injury after the 16-game mark, and ironically against Buffalo, who he lost to in the playoffs, but that's another story altogether, and didn't play again till the spring. Now, this year saw the start of many rising stars for Montreal, especially Yvon Lambert, Steve Shutt, Dougie Risebrough, Murray Wilson, Mario Tremblay, Bob Gainey, Pierre Bouchard, Rick Chartres, who were a big part of the future team, championship teams. And they had up-and-coming prospects like John Van Boxmeer, Glenn Goldup. Michel Larocque was a great backup for Ken Dryden. So it was a team of youth, a team of strength. And they were scoring multitudes of goals at home. And in the playoffs, a lot of people believed that Montreal had the team to win the Cup. Now, first round, they played the very tough Vancouver Canucks, a squad that at the time was building. It was very underrated. But eventually Montreal won that series 4-1. Vancouver squeaked out a road win against Montreal in Game 2, but from then on it was all Montreal, and they knocked them off in a very famous Game 5 overtime in an April night that's still talked about as one of the best games Montreal played in the playoffs in the 1970s. Now, into the semifinals, they drew the French Connection and the Buffalo Sabres. Now, at the time, the Buffalo Sabres were considered probably one of the most explosive teams in the NHL. They could score goals, they could hit, there were grinders. Players like Gilles Perreault, René Robert, Rick Martin, Jerry Korab, Roger Crozier, and net Jerry Desjardins, who I basically told once he was any better, he will win the Cup that year, but that's a story for another time. The first two games, Buffalo won in Buffalo, especially the infamous 6-5 game against Montreal in the first contest, where Montreal made a comeback but couldn't finish it off. When the series went back to Montreal, they outscored Buffalo 15-2. They won 7-0 in A2, and a lot of people believed that Montreal was on the way to a mild upset. But what happened? Overtime kicked Montreal again in Game 5. They lost 5-4 in overtime. And they went back to Montreal, but unfortunately lost 4-3. Now, we all know that Buffalo lost to the Philadelphia Flyers in the final that year, and I still believe that Jerry Desjardins was a more consistent goalie. He would have defeated the Flyers, putting in the old man Roger Crozier in the net to try to stop the Broad Street Bullies. Didn't really work. But this was kind of bizarre this year with Montreal, because a connection to the future Edmonton Oilers' success, he picked up Glenn Sader in the offseason, Don Orey, as kind of a defensive augment. And no offense to Glenn Sader, he took a place away from the young players coming up. I think that was the only mistake that season Montreal did. Overall, the fan support was building. The excitement of Guy Lafleur's rise as an NHL player, it was palpable. They should have won the Cup that year, but unfortunately, those 2 overtime losses to Buffalo killed him. And Dryden was, not say he was bad that year, but at times he showed the inconsistency that he showed against the Russians in '72. He showed in this season. The only reason I think Montreal never won the Cup is just that it just wasn't their time. and winning 4 straight cups right after that shows how difficult it is winning the NHL. In the mid-70s were a weird time for the NHL because we had the fall of the New York Rangers as a power, the fall of the Blackhawks. Detroit wasn't a factor anymore like the original 6 teams. Toronto as well. In 1975, they weren't really ready for the rise they had of the late 70s. So, but if you have a chance, there's not much on the 74-75 season for Montreal on YouTube. But if you have a chance, there are some Buffalo YouTubes and Philadelphia that shows basically how good Philadelphia and Buffalo were. But if Montreal would have played Philadelphia that year, I think you would have won in 6 games at least. But that's just me. But like I say, when you lose in overtime in the playoffs, especially a team like Buffalo, you don't give a team like that an opportunity, because Gilles Perreault once said beating Montreal was sort of like it was too much of a high, and when he went into the Flyers, they weren't really motivated, because every Quebec player in the 70s wanted to beat the Montreal Canadiens, because either they were mad that Montreal didn't draft him, or that Montreal didn't recognize the impact of French players outside of the Habs system. But what's great about this, if you really look at the 74-75 season, it was the last bastion of the Richard era. And I think if Richard wouldn't have got hurt, it might have been a different game. Maybe Montreal would have lost 9 or 10 games, because Richard always scored big goals. So on this kind of snowy Thursday, where the storm has stopped, we wish you a great day. As we like to say in Montreal, you better keep your stick on the ice, because you don't want to get that 5-minute penalty from a Koharski knockoff. Hope this finds you well. Have a good day. Bye.